Hi folks, welcome to The Break Key. My name's Henry, and today we're going to look right back into the programmable input-output block on the RP2040. And let me tell you, it has been kicking my butt. Yeah, last time we looked at this, I did manage to get something to compile. I tried it and it failed miserably. So I've been iterating and trying to figure out what's going on. And I finally remembered I have an oscilloscope and I have the ability to do some testing. And once I remembered that, a few interesting things popped up that might have explained a little bit. So stick right there where you are and let's see what happens, because I might just be able to get something to work right here on the break key. So what I think was causing a bit of an issue was this state machine here. We're waiting for a rising edge of the clock pin, which in this case is... Clock pin is pin 25. GPIO pin 25 goes to the E clock. So we wait for that to go low. On the falling edge, we turn off all the outputs. Lovely. We don't to do that. So let's see what our timing diagram has to say. Waiting for the E clock to go low is fine. At that point, it would make sense to close off the outputs. And it would make sense to wait for the CTS pin to drop, because the CTS pin is going to drop, he says, as he pulls up the SAM sheet. CTS drops after all your addresses are valid. So A0 through A15 RW is fine. And then over here, S0, S1, S2 is fine. That's got to be taken care of, as we talked about earlier. CTS will drop after the addresses are valid. So once CTS drops, we can move the base address into the ISR, shift in the ROM address, and then now we're pulling. This adds another wrinkle, which is direct memory access. We'll look into that here in a minute. So the first test is to see what the heck's going on with this. And if I take this and isolate it out, I should be able to see something. So the trick is, we've only got a very short period of time before we have to get data back over to the Coco. We're running into the direct memory access to make that happen, so that we don't have to worry about interrupts, processor cycles, anything like that. It goes straight from the PIO to the DMA. DMA feeds it. We're done. All right. Now, in order to do that, there's a few things that need to be set up. You'll notice here that I'm including rom.h and cmakelist.txt. I've also included rom.c, and that actually contains, this is the HDB-DOS ROM set up as an array of bytes. So the next thing I need to do is pull in a rom.pi, or the actual ROM emulator itself. We are setting up a DMA channel, which is a little bit of black magic, to be sure. After we've set up and loaded the program, we're going to claim an unused DMA channel. We're going to do the default configuration of that. And we're going to do the same thing for both the address and for the data side. So the read increment and write increment for the ROM data, that doesn't really matter, but we don't want that to auto increment. The write increment doesn't really matter that much, but the read increment does matter, because we want to be able to read that data that we're specifying. So the data request that we're going to be grabbing will be coming from the PIO we're using for the ROM emulator, and it will be using the ROM state machine. Great, wonderful, marvelous. This, once it is finished, will chain over to run the DMA information for the address channel. We set our size of transfer to 1 byte because that's all we need. We turn off IRQs, and then we set this, we enable the channel, and we configure the channel so that we configure the ROM channel or the data channel with its configuration. We set it so that it's writing to the transmit FIFO of the ROM state machine. And the initial read address will be from ROM, which is the address of our actual ROM information. And we do not start that immediately. Now, the address side, however, once we get the address, again, we do not want to read or do not want to auto increment with either read or write. But we do need to grab the data request from the state machine again. And in this particular case, this is not the transmit side. This chains off to the data. So once the data is finished, it chains off to address. Once the address is finished, it chained off to data. We set it up so we can grab all 32 bits from the PIO. We turn off interrupts. We make sure we enable our configuration, and then we set up our configuration. The initial read address is from the RX FIFO. One transfer. That's all we want to do, and we do want to start this immediately. So once we start this, it starts right here at waiting for the clock pin to go low. So the clock pin goes low. That is, the E clock goes low. At that point, it turns off all the outputs, and it waits for CTS to go low. This makes sense because CTS will go low when S0, S1, and S2 show that they are the value that CTS is listening to, which I think is 5. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's not really that important, but because it's already decoded by the Coco and sent to the appropriate pen. From there, we put the base address in we put the base address that we've loaded up, and we loaded that up way the snot up here. This is all loading in the initial data to that PIO block. We're putting the base address. We're putting the base address of the ROM into the PIO output shift register. We are waiting for the PIO to pull. We're telling it to pull. That's an immediate command. Then we're telling it to move that output shift register over to Y, and then we just tell it to send 1 bit out. Now, when this thing starts up, it's already got the value of that base address in the Y register. So all it needs to do, once it waits for the clock pin and the clock pin to go low, and it turns the data bits off, it waits for its CTS pin to go low, which we know is valid because CTS goes low after A0 through A15 and the read-write line go low. We put the base address into our input shift register, and we shift in the actual ROM data, the actual ROM address itself, which in this case will be 14 bits. After that's done, we do a blocking pull. So once this is done, the address DMA says, I've got data. I know what I need to do with that data. So now, once I've got that data, I will trigger the data side of the DMA. That will pull from there, and once that's got it, it will send that out to the outputs. It sets the pin values first, and it waits for the clock pin to go high. Now, looking at this looks fine. But what if E goes high after CTS goes low? Then we're out of spec, aren't we? What if something's funky about the timing? I'm thinking that we've got a timing issue. So let me first see if this will compile and run. Yep, that's exactly what I expected. This is very similar to what we were seeing before. I'm pretty sure that I know what's happening here. Now, my upper trace is on CTS, my lower trace is on SCS. So if I want to look at CTS, that's relatively simple. If I want to look at SCS, that's relatively simple. SCS triggers anything between FF40 and FF, let me put the trigger on channel 2. We'll trigger on anything from FF40 to FF50F. So, and let me move that trigger location over. This trigger looks perfectly fine. we're expecting about a clock cycle's worth, a little bit more than a clock cycle's worth. And this is per division, we've got 500 nanoseconds. So that's a full, like, clock cycle. That's a full 1 microsecond there, which is exactly what we expect to see. Now, what about for CTS? And this is kind of what broke my brain a little bit. Got the signal. Oh, that's right. I need to change the trigger because if it's not looking at that, it's not going to trigger on it. So my trigger source is now going to be channel 1. And if I run that again, look at what CTS is doing. CTS has a rise, and then it's coming up. I have absolutely no clue what is causing this. Now, I also want to compare this to E. So, we're seeing that this appears to be rising on what looks like a subdivision of the clock, but it is definitely falling again when E goes high. Now, this can cause all sorts of problems. We can kind of see where CTS is going low shortly after E goes low. CTS comes back high again over the threshold voltage because we're looking at a threshold voltage of about 1.8 volts, maybe 2 or something like that for a pico. It comes back high. Pico will see a high value and it will drop again. And the next one, see a high value. This whole thing looks ridiculously confusing, especially when dealing with E. What if I didn't clock on E at all? What if the only thing I clock on is CTS? And here's my rationale. CTS is used as the enable source for the ROM. If you look at any of your cartridges, you'll see that CTS does your ROM enable. If I change this enabling, instead of waiting for 0 for the clock pin, if I turn off the pins when CTS goes high, CTS pin goes low, we know that we've got a good address in there, we put the address in there, we pull the data, we out the data pins, we do not wait for the clock pin to go back high, but instead we simply only use CTS pin, run that, and if I do that, everything should be fine at this point. Yes! Bang! All right, so that's working. Whatever it was, that's now working. That's doing what it's supposed to do. We've taken care of the cartridge select, and as we see, cartridge select goes directly to, let's see, that is line 0, 1, 2, 3, which would be an S3 off the SAM. We know that S equal 3 off the SAM starts at C1000. At FF00 through FFFF, we have this range here, and we see that the IO range 2, again, FF40 through FF50F is S equals 6. When we look at the Coco, we see that the SCS line goes over to, that's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, comes right on down, shoots down there. That's our SCS line. So when S0, S1, and S2 from the SAM are set up, then this delay happens, and if we're FF40 through FF50F, we get our SCS signal. So we should be able to use SCS only in order to access cartridge port hardware. If we look at our slow rate, we see that the cartridge select happens shortly after read, write, and address is set up. That's great. And we see in the fast rate that it happens much the same way, but we also see that we're doubling the clock frequency for the 6809. The 6809 shows us that once the address is set, and again, we've got a guaranteed delay for SCS to come up. When SCS comes or goes low, goes active, we know that we have good address data. We have a delay between the time that the write data between the time that Q rises and the write data is available. So that delay time is a maximum of 200 nanoseconds, which is approximately 1/4 of a cycle at 1 megahertz. In the 68A09E, that's a maximum of 140, and the 68B09, that's going to be 110 nanoseconds. Now, I'm not sure whether this has anything to do with propagation delay or whether this has to do with actual clocking. I do not know internally what the 6809 is clocking against to assert the data bus. It looks like it's clocking against Q with a pretty significant gate delay, but I could very well be wrong. In this particular case, we see that there's another one that's about a minimum of 200 nanoseconds, and that is the delay time from the Q high to the E fall. Let's see, that's Q high, and I'm looking for Q high to E high. Q high to E rise. There we are. That's a 200 nanosecond delay, and that's number 7A, which is right here. So I don't know. This could be clocking on Q. This could be clocking on E. I'm not sure which. So what I have done, however, is I have put together the Handtech in such a way that I can use it as a logic probe. Now, the software I've got only really sees 8 of those 16 lines there. That's fine. I'm not worried about that. I really only need 8 lines because there's not that much that I want to listen to. So let's get this wired up. Get her plugged back in. Sorry about the wobble vision there. Should work. Let's check and make sure that we actually have. Good. It's reading the cartridge, which is exactly what it's supposed to be doing where last we left our heroes. And now, so I want EQ read write SCS. Let me make sure that I've got that correct here. There we go, A0, A1, D0, D1, and that looks correct. So I should be well set to get this running. So I will bring this up. So that will definitely bring a data line 0 low and a data line 1 high. Okay, and then to 10. Let's run that, make sure it's working. That looks good. And let's see what we get from our capture. Oh, nothing. Let's try this again. We'll set this up for 24 megahertz, and let me get a couple of gigasamples. There we go. That's more like what I wanted. All right, so I've got hairs happening here. One of these should be a read, one of these should be a write. This is the write. Okay, so write goes low, SCA goes low, that's what we're expecting. Address line 0 is low, address line 1 is high, so we're sending out to 2, which is what we're expecting. In data 0 goes low, data 1 goes high, that's what we're expecting. What does this clock against? After the rising edge of Q, so we've got E goes low, that goes high. This goes low after the rise of Q. And let me make sure that I've actually got that correct. Q is on the gray line. That is the gray line. That is the gray line. After the rising edge of Q, my data is asserted. At the rising edge of E, my data is known valid. At the falling edge of Q, my data is known valid. Now, next trick. I want to try this in fast mode. So to set up fast mode, if I poke to FFD9 and send a 1 there, that should give me fast mode. Let me see what happens with that. Yeah, it's not happy. And that's doing exactly what I expected. I can capture that. Yeah, that's only 4 samples. Yeah, so that's a lot faster. Yeah, that's definitely running at double speed comparatively. Good. That's doing exactly what I wanted to do. Let me get this back to large, and let's grab some capture here. Oh, it was a syntax error. It never worked in the first place. So I do have SCS happening there. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Let's see how this clocks in. We have A0 go high. We have A1 stay low. SCS goes low. We're fine. Everything's set up and we're good to go. And it's listening to the data bus at this point, which is fine. We've got E and Q happening, and then at the fall of E, SCS goes high. We can deassert. So I've got the SCS goes low. We know we're safe to assert. Q goes high. After Q goes high, the data is asserted, and the data is asserted once E goes high. I can sample that either after E goes high or when Q goes low. I've already got E on there. I don't have SCS on there, so I'll need SCS. I can latch the data at E high and only have to change out 1 pin. Lovely. All right, there we are. So I will go with that. All right, so SCS is going to work. We'll use the SCS signal to trigger the PIOs that will be used for the Becker port side of things. Wonderful. Problem is, as I said before, we don't have that pin mapped anywhere on the Pico. So since we only need 14 bits up to A13, I'll simply repurpose A15, this GP823 or pin 26, to be what we're using for the SCS signal. The SCS signal is already broken out over here, but in order to put that onto that, I've already done the bodge and moved SCS over to pin 26. And with that bodge done, we're able to get into the code. So let's get Becker.pio in here. While we're at it, let's make sure that we've set that up in our cmakelist.txt. So we want data from the Coco going into the Pico. That's our first thing. We know that we'll need, if I double define, it's not going to break anything. So define 25. Our signal pin is the SCS pin, which we put on. That was, yep, GP23. Let's see. This was our address width. We will need our address width later. That's going to be 5 bits. Again, since we're using SCS, we already know that we're FF40 to FF50F. That's only 5 bits. Data width again. I also need to listen to the read-write pin. In the case of CTS, we don't really need to listen to the read-write pin because that is always going to be a read, or at least in the same configuration, it's always going to be a read. In the case of, that may change later. There might be carts that try to write back, in which case we need to listen to it, but that's not a big deal to change that. Or at least it shouldn't be a big deal to change that. We'll find out. But we do need to listen to read and write here because we need to deal with reads and writes separately. So here's what our Becker read machine is going to need to do. It will need to wait for SCS to go low. Data's not going to be valid until right around the rising edge of E. If we wait a little bit past that, we'll have valid data. We saw that in with the timings. And then after that, we just grab our data, wait for SCS to go back high to deassert, and then run back from the beginning. So, but we only do that if the state of the read-write pin is right. Ain't nothing happening until we get SCS. Jump pin only makes the jump if that pin is high. We're setting the read-write pin as our jump pin. If it's high, the Coco's doing a read, and this state machine doesn't do reads. It only does the writes. And here we'll insert a little bit of a delay after E rises to ensure that we're catching valid data. Once that's there, we can grab the information we need for the pins, and we will be setting this up to auto push. We do need the address so that we know what to do with it. There we go. That should take care of that. Now, the way this is arranged, the data bits are on the bottom of the word, and the address bits are in the second byte. Okay, what am I doing here? The configuration, we are shifting to the left. So when things come in, that's my right, that's your left. I get confused anyway. But we're moving bits towards the most significant bit instead of moving bits towards the least significant bit. And we are allowing ourselves to auto push, which is what I wanted to do. And the push threshold will be 13 bits. All right, that should do it. Save that out. Now, that all done, I need to set up the program to work in the main.c so that it can see what's happening here. We'll set up a different one. And I want to make sure this runs from RAM. There's a small incantation that we ran across in the other code that says this is a time critical function, run it from RAM. We don't want to be holding around for that. So we'll check to see if there's anything in the RX FIFO. And if there isn't anything in the RX FIFO from the SCS receive state machine, i.e. from the Coco to the Pico, if that FIFO is empty, then we'll just ignore everything. If it isn't empty, then we need to see it. Since this is the Becker port, we're only listening to port 2. This would be FF42, so port 2. And now we'll just grab the data. And that should tell us what we have, this should tell us whether or not we've got anything coming. There we go. And we've already set up the ROM emulator. Now, what we have not done is we have not set up the Becker port. We know how to handle it, but we haven't set it up. And this is the part that I always seem to forget when I'm doing the testing. That right there, that turns it on. I have to remember to turn it on. I get everything set up and then I forget to turn it on. All right, that should have everything set. We just need to go down to main and get that running. Let's see if this will compile. That much is happy. Looks reasonably happy. All right, let's see if it worked. That's not pleasant. That was not pretty at all. That looks much better. All right, let's get you out of the way so I can actually see what's going on here. Saying it might have data. I am definitely screwing something up. I'm touching something wrong over here. Might have data. I got data 0. Looks right. And it might have data. Just to check it. Yep, everything looks good. Everything looks perfectly fine. So this is working. Now, if you think for 1 minute that that's the first time I tried that, you haven't been watching my videos. Oh no, there is a whole slew of having to deal with why aren't things working right in putting that together. And the big problem with working with PIO code is, yet interactive debugging, it might exist, but I don't have the tooling for it to exist right now, at least not in my setup. And I had to go through and look at the logic of it and just be like, please, please work. I've not had to do debugging like this since the 80s. And even then, I wasn't very good at it. So that was a task, and it proved to me that if the logic is correct and the environment is sane, things work if you do it correctly. And things don't work if you forget something important. But yeah, this was so frustrating to do. But anyway, back to it. We're getting back to the next part of this. When we did the ROM emulator, we went with a DMA. So in this particular case, I don't think a DMA is going to work that terribly well. It could, but I still need to put data from the Fujinet device into the port that I'm going to be reading from. And I need to put data into the port, telling that port that I've got data in it. Yeah, FF41 is status, FF42 is data. So we're not going to use DMA with that. We should have plenty of cycles available to us. We've got roughly 125 cycles per clock sequence. SCS gives us 125-ish clock cycles. If we wind up doing double speed, that's going to be about 65-ish clock cycles, which should still be plenty of time. So for the write to, if the Coco is signaling that it's trying to write, we ignore things. We also want to make sure that we don't delay in sending the address to the Coco, so that address gets sent via auto push. Now, we will be coming back up to the top if we're dealing with a condition where the Coco is trying to write. This is only for when the Coco is trying to read. Just like we did with the CartROM emulator, we want to, at the top of the program, wait until the signal pin, in this case SCS pin, goes back to high. It's no longer asserting any information that's necessary. That way we can shut down what we're sending to the Coco. At this point, I need to check to make sure that the Coco's actually doing a read. Jump pin jumps if and only if the jump pin is high. So since high indicates a read, I want to continue on. But if we don't take that jump, I need to head right back over to the top here and ignore life until the Coco wants to do something. That's it. That's all we need. I'll put a little bit of exposition in here in text. The processor core needs to tell the PIO, somehow, some way the PIO needs to know, do I act on this or do I not? We're handing in those 5 bits. Those 5 bits will be able to tell whether or not we use them, just like we did, where'd it go? Way up here, where if it's not port 2, we just kind of ignore it. And if we do not figure out a way to get the PIO to ignore that address, it's not going to work. We can send that address directly in, and we can return a piece of data that will give us whether or not we're actually going to assert this particular port. So what we will do here, the value we get back will be 16 bits long. We'll use the bottom bit to signal whether or not we're going to assert the data bus, or the bottom byte to determine whether or not we're going to assert the data bus. And we'll use the top byte as the data to assert. And now all we have to do is wait for the MPU to respond. These bottom 8 bits, we shift those out to the X register so that we can determine whether or not to continue on. So let's look at how many instructions we've used. We got 4 instructions to spare, it looks like. We've got plenty of room to spare. Now, getting this initialized. Now, the GPIO pin assignment, as far as what's output and input, that's already been done over here. However, I will repeat this in case I want to reuse this and put it on a different PIO block. We've already set that to running. We have not done the initialization in main yet, so let's get back up here in the Handlebecker and, oh, not in Handlebecker, that's, yes. Is that one? No, I don't want to deal with it in Handlebecker just yet. I want to set it up here. And the setup should be pretty much identical. Now I've got something to do with the data bytes, so I will set what's already set in there. When we receive that, I will set, I want another one, another status indicator, because the read from FF41 is what's used to determine whether or not a byte's available on the Becker port. So and notice what we're doing here. We're taking the value of data that we want to send, that we out on the pipe, shifting that left 8 bits to make room for whether or not we're actually going to use that. So there we are. The other thing we will do, aside from notifying that we found that, we'll clear that out and we'll clear that out. So now what is empty? Have value is empty, and I should be able to see a 0 when that's done. I believe that's everything that I need to do to make this work. Let's try it. What's the worst that can happen? So I think what happened here is it tried to auto boot. And when it tried to auto boot, because I actually have like things that it can do on the Becker port, and it failed to do some things. So we'll disable the auto boot here. That's a magic number that it uses, ASCII DK, capital D, capital K. So we get rid of that, it will not auto boot now. Ah, there's my problem. Yeah, you see this? This right here? Okay, that's why I was having so much difficulty. This was constantly asserting the data bus. No wonder it couldn't see anything. No wonder it couldn't find anything. I didn't tell it to stop. Oh, wait a minute. No, I got that backwards. What location? Otherwise, let's see. Inserting data onto the data. Yeah, okay. Oh, it's... No, I never... Okay. Whatever it is. I got the polarity wrong. It never actually was able to send data out. So that shouldn't have done that. That shouldn't have been a problem. You deasserted this data bus OSR null. That should just never have asserted the data bus. But in any case, let's fix that. All right. I don't know why it worked, but it worked. At least this time it did. Let's see. And it did see to ask for data outside the IO range, might have data. All right. Now, just to make sure everything's working. Oh! Well, there's your problem. Let's try that again. You can't reuse state machines on the PIO. Well, there's my problem. Or at least one of them. So there were two issues. One, I didn't set the data outputs. That didn't break right. So, all right, now you make a lot more sense. Let's see if that fixes it. That doesn't look right. That doesn't look right at all. Matter of fact, that looks exceptionally wrong. I'm at an absolute loss. What the heck did I do differently here? Are you flippin' kidding me right now? Did I actually do that? All right. Let's see if that fixed it. See what I get. I was asked for data outside. Asked for Becker status. Asked for Becker data. Okay, so let's get back over to this real quick and get you back up and running. That looks good, which is a 2A in hex. We see over there, looks good. If we run this again, bang-a-rang, that's exactly what I expected to see. We're good there. And that's a little bit wonky with the 88 and the 51. I'm not sure what's happening with that, but I'm sure it has to do with timing more than anything else. We'll run this again and see what we come up with. And there she goes, zeroed out, just like we expected. Excellent. It looks like I have a working ROM emulator. I have a working Becker port read, and I have a working Becker port write. Lovely. About flipping time. Well, that was an amazingly fun fiasco. Oh, I cannot believe how many little piddly errors there are and how big of a problem they cause simply because debugging in real time on the PIO kind of doesn't happen. But it got done. It got done. We have a functioning cart-ROM emulator. We have a functioning send to and receive from the Becker port. Becker port status is working. Now, given it's not actually doing the thing where it's talking to the Fujinet device just yet, that's for a little bit later, and that's going to involve a UART, which is going to be all kinds of fun. But at least the foundational talking to the Coco bits are taken care of. That's a good thing. So I'm going to call this one good for now. And we will go into the next part where hopefully we'll actually communicate with the Fujinet device via a UART and maybe get like this full bus dongle free version working. Who knows? Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so that you don't miss a beat. And when we're next here playing with Fujinet, or when we're next here playing with something else, you can be right here enjoying life on the break key.